shift, the stakes are high. The mag breaks it down, no need to sigh. From EU rules to global news, Reg with Meg, your trusted views.
All right, so welcome back to Reg with Meg, the podcast where we deliver regulatory news and share insights from medical device and IVD manufacturers. Today, we welcome back Brittany Dunning, MedEnvoy's regulatory consultant who has over 8 years of experience in regulatory affairs with expertise ranging from the US, UK, EU, Singapore, and Saudi Arabia. Brittany, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Tiffany. I'm great to be back.
Awesome. So today we're talking about EUDAMED and what's mandatory by May 2026, where companies are getting stuck, and how manufacturers can coordinate with authorized reps, importers, and notified bodies without a last-minute scramble. So, first question I have for you to start us off, can you break down which EUDAMED modules will actually be mandatory by May 28, 2026 deadline, and which ones are still optional?
Sure, Tiffany. So by the May 28 deadline of this year, 4 EUDAMED modules have been validated as fully functional, meaning that they are mandatory. So those modules are the Actor Registration module, the UDI Database and Device Registration module, Notified Bodies and Certificates module, and Market Surveillance. But here's an important nuance. While all 4 modules are mandatory, manufacturers will primarily be active in only the first 2, which are the Actors and the UDI Devices Registration modules. So notified bodies are the ones that are going to be uploading into the certificates module, and then the competent authorities are going to drive the market surveillance module while also playing an important role in issuing the SRNs to the manufacturers. So the EU has also signaled that the vigilance module is anticipated for mandatory use in Q2 of 2027, but that's subject to a successful audit and separate published notice. So not going to be included in the May 2026 mandatory set. The vigilance module is, however, already available in the EUDAMED playground for testing and allows users to kind of get a feel for what the module will look like. So we definitely suggest users to go ahead and play around in the playground and get a feel for what that's going to be.
A lot going on there with the modules coming up. So for companies that haven't fully engaged with EUDAMED yet, what are their biggest readiness gaps right now?
Sure. So the biggest gaps tend to be gating items. So things you can't work around close to the deadline. So let's talk about kind of the 3 main gaps that we're going to see. So gap 1 is that actor registration isn't just a form. So for many non-EU manufacturers, the actor registration flows through the authorized representative review when applicable, and then competent authority approval. And that timeline can vary depending on authority capacity. So it's really important to note that though while the process for EU-based manufacturers and SPP producers is different, it's also important to note, though, that the process for EU-based manufacturers and SPP producers is different since there is no EU AR involved. So gap 2, you're missing required people, roles, or documents. Actor registration requires identifying roles like the EU Authorized Representative for non-EU-based manufacturers and listing all PRRCs, plus assigning at least 2 local actor administrators. So for non-EU manufacturers, supporting documentation like a mandate summary document is called out as part of being ready to submit cleanly. Lastly, gap 3 is that the device master data isn't in EUDAMED shape. So for device registration, companies often discover that they don't have consistent values for things like basic UDI-DI, UDI-DI, issuing agencies, EMDN codes, classifications characteristics, trade names and models, and intended member state marketing info. So they really need to make sure that everything is structured and consistent.
Wow. So looking ahead to the upcoming deadline, what would you say are some practical steps manufacturers should be taking now to avoid a last-minute rush?
So I kind of put this in a tight do this first sequence. So number 1, Let's start actor registration early and plan for review cycles. So, if you're a non EU actor, assume that the AR review step and then competent authority review, including the possibility of corrections requests, will take a little bit of time. And then manufacturers, which are also SPP producers, should be aware that they need to register as both in EUDAMED. Number two, lock down that internal governance before data entry. So make sure that you're assigning your local actor administrators, confirming your PRRC listing, and making sure that any non EU mandate documentation is ready. Number three, treat device registration as a post CE marking activity with real dependencies. So, EUDAMED device registration occurs after CE marking, and you must complete the actor registration before the device registration. Number four, coordinate early with your notified body on certificate linkage where applicable. So, manufacturers need that actor plus the UDI device registration completed before the notified body can register and upload the certificates and related public facing summaries where required. However, it's important to clarify that the notified bodies will not be uploading CE certificates for all products, such as in the case for legacy devices and low risk devices that don't have CE certificates. And then lastly, number five, use testing environments and rehearsals. So, we at MedEnvoy explicitly recommend using the EUDAMED playground to validate technical submissions like the XML uploads and machine-machine connections ahead of the mandatory date. It's also helpful to familiarize the user in the case of manual data entry, which can take some time with estimates of anywhere from 6 to 7 to upwards of 10 to 15 minutes minimum for each UDI/DI in case of manual data entry.
So data quality keeps coming up in conversations about UNIMED. What kind of data or registration issues do you think companies are most likely to run into as the deadline approaches?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be two main issues. So, first is the actor registration errors that can block SRN issuance. So, if the authorized rep doesn't digitally accept the manufacturer's link, then the manufacturer may not be able to obtain their SRN. Although we have seen and heard that some notified bodies will accept an application without the SRN. Regardless, trying to proceed without that SRN can block actors from key downstream activities such as the conformity assessment application and issuing of a declaration conformity. So it's really important to note that that SRN is required at the time of issuing the CE certificate. So it's really best to have that as soon as you're able. The second main issue is the UDI device data that fails validation or just can't simply be linked. Device registration requires detailed structured data. And here at MedEnvoy, we really highlight those core elements such as the basic UDI/DI and classification characteristics. And really want to note that changes to registered information may require a new UDI registered in EUDAMED. Another point to keep in mind is that custom devices, investigational devices, or devices that are currently undergoing performance studies without already having CE marking are exempt from registration at this time. So, confusion about whether a product must be registered may also cause some issues if these teams aren't clarifying the scope early.
So how do these requirements change the role of EU authorized representatives in practice?
Great question, Tiffany. So, the EU authorized rep becomes an active compliance gatekeeper in EUDAMED, not just a passive mailbox. So, the authorized rep has a hard coded verification rule. So, they're going to need to verify the manufacturer's registration data and digitally accept the link for SRN issuance, like we discussed earlier. It's also important to emphasize that due diligence procedures and liabilities realities that push the ARs to review and not simply just rubber stamp the data, which means manufacturers need to treat that AR review process as a real workflow. So, another important point to note is that you may only have one EAR per GDG, which stands for Generic Device Group and pertains to the code that groups devices together based on their intended purpose. And then the biggest takeaway, manufacturers should expect ARs to request clean documentation, structured data, and ample time to review, especially as that May 2026 deadline is approaching here in just a few months.
So what does that mean for regulatory importers? New responsibilities or increased expectations?
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest business impact shifts. So EUDAMED introduces a hard stop mechanism. So importers and distributors are legally obligated to verify that a device is correctly registered in EUDAMED before placing it on the market. So in reality, this means that the importer process will need to verify two things, and that is that the manufacturer has an SRN and that the device has the required registrations. Meaning the basic UDI/DI is in place where applicable, or shipments are going to be stalled, and we're going to see some real downstream consequences.
So, from your perspective, how ready are notified bodies for the May 2026 deadline, and where do you see potential bottlenecks?
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest bottleneck isn't necessarily will the notified bodies know that the deadline exists and be ready, but it's just operational sequencing. So manufacturers must complete that actor and device UDI registration before the notified bodies can upload and register the certificates and certain summaries where required. So this creates a dependency chain. If the manufacturer entries are late or messy, then the certificate side can't be cleanly processed and the notified bodies can't proceed on their end. So it's also another important note is that timelines for CE certificate upload for the notified bodies are not synced with the deadline for EUDAMED device registration. So there's going to be a little bit of difference in those deadlines there.
So, if you could give manufacturers one piece of advice right now to help them coordinate more smoothly with their authorized rep, regulatory importer, and notified body ahead of May 2026, what would it be?
Yes. So I'd say that one piece of advice is going to be a three-part here. The biggest thing is make one shared UDAMED readiness map. And that can cover these three things. So, number one, actor registration workflow and timing. This includes the authorized rep review and the competent authority approval cycles. The second piece is device data ownership and validation. So, who owns the basic UDI/DI, the EMDN, characteristics, member state marketing fields, and change control. And then the third piece includes downstream dependency dates for notified body certificate uploads and importer release to market verification. So, overall, if everyone agrees on that one map, you can really avoid the classic failure mode where the manufacturer thinks, oh, we'll register later. Then the AR is waiting to verify. Then the notified body is waiting to upload certificates. And ultimately, the importer is stuck with a product that they can't actually legally place on the market. So we really want to make sure that that doesn't happen where possible. So also important to note is that in the case of certificate uploads by the notified body, information will not be live in EUDAMED before the info is added by the notified body. So following that map with those three main, points is really, really critical.
Lastly, I do want to take a quick detour and ask you, what about SwissDemit?
Yeah, so great question. Funny you should ask, as that's actually going to be our next podcast topic coming up here in just a few short weeks. So
Mhm.
listeners can kind of expect to hear some of the things that we're going to talk about. So the SwissMed Actors module, which has been mandatory since August 6th of 2024 for Swiss-based economic operators. We're going to touch on that. We're also going to talk about the SwissDemed Devices module, which will become mandatory on July 1st of this year, 2026, with a transition period that's going to end December 31st of this year. So there's also specific expectations for devices that are new to market or subject to vigilance action, which we will get into further in that podcast. Another point that we'll kind of discuss are the device registration fees that will be starting in July. Those are currently proposed at 300 Swiss francs per notification, but that could change. So we'll discuss that. And then importantly, the biggest piece that we'll kind of touch on more is that there's no link between EUDAMED and SwissMed. That data must be uploaded to each system separately. However, you can obtain an XML download from EUDAMED, which can be used for data upload into SwissMed. So while they are separate systems, they still can work based off on the same data set.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to give a special thank you to Brittany for joining us again today and
Thanks,
sharing her
Tiffany.
insights. You're welcome. So happy that you came and sharing her insights about EUDAMED. And if you want to stay up to date with EUDAMED, we have an upcoming podcast episode about swissdamed again with Brittany or other regulatory news. Follow us on our Spotify for future episodes. We always have a new episode up weekly. And until next time, stay informed and stay compliant. Bye, guys.